Jewell, along with the rest of the United States, was captivated by the words, images, and stories coming from Europe during the outbreak of the war in 1939. The United States had committed to helping the Allies, but would not commit completely to the war effort. The United States had split ideas on what and how the U.S. should help the war effort. William Jewell College was no different. Some believed that an active military involvement was in the best interest of the United States and our allied forces. Others believed that it was finally our time as a country to avoid the wars of Europe and merely aid with raw war materials for the Allies. The best way for the opinions of the student body to be voiced and heard was through the newspaper, the William Jewell Student. Before we jump into the nuts and bolts of the ideologies of the students of William Jewell, some background information will make the situation clearer. Jewell is located in the heart of America in the city of Liberty, Missouri. Jewell was founded in 1849 by members of the Missouri Baptist Convention. Construction of the school started off a donation of $10,000 by William Jewell, physician, legislator, and most importantly, for the future of this documentary, a Baptist layman. Jewell had, from its initiation, a close association with the Missouri Baptist Convention. This close affiliation lasted for over 150 years, until Jewell's removal in 2003. William Jewell College, from its initiation in 2003, was a private four-year Baptist college. When creating this documentary, this group was fortunate enough to be introduced to William Prather. William Prather is a living veteran of World War II and an alumni of William Jewell. This man was a great deal of help to this group, and once again, before we jump into the research that we've done, we'd like to tell you a little bit about him. His input was a great help, and without him this presentation wouldn't be nearly as good. William Prather was born and raised in Excelsior Springs, Missouri, and attended William Jewell, and was a volunteer in World War II. Prather was born on March 4th, 1924, and enrolled in 1942. In the winter of that same year, Prather volunteered to join the Army Air Corps and left Jewell to train outside St. Louis, Missouri. In 1943, he was sent to college detachment training in Ashland, Wisconsin. He was trained to be a pilot in Santa Ana, California, and excelled in his chosen profession. Prather was top of his class and was the first student to fly solo. As the war in Europe would presumably be over by the time Prather would be trained and ready to go there, he primarily focused and was trained for the CBI, China, Burma, and Indian Theater. Unfortunately, Prather didn't end up in Asia. Prather flew cargo planes to Germany, carrying displaced people back home. William Prather was part of the last American operation in France and was one of the last soldiers to be sent home. Prather returned to Jewell to continue his education. He received a major in economics, history, and political science, along with being a member of the Sigma Nu fraternity.
British colleges like at Jewell in the Navy program that they were having, or Oshkosh where I was, they had a lot of guys that would sign up for the Air Corps, but they didn't. But no one, you couldn't sign up to be a pilot or a co-pilot, a bombardier, or a navigator. You just went into a pool of people who were involved. And after leaving, after a couple of months there in Oshkosh, when they sent us to Santa Ana, California, we went through programs there that decided whether we would be a pilot or a co-pilot or a bombardier or navigator, or they even washed them out. I used to have some percentages and figures of the number of washouts that occurred in the cadet program. It ran rather high at the time, and particularly in a private. In primary, if you had the, anyway, in Santa Ana they decided whether you were, what school you would be sent to. I happened to be chosen to go to a pilot school, which is what I wanted in the first place. That was, again, in California. The weather was good. The college that I was in was up in Wisconsin, Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And, but it was a school for the aviation people who have enlisted in the Air Corps. And so they taught everything, a lot of things, refresher courses to help you when you got on into their programs.
The William Jewell student had a major role in voicing what the students of William Jewell thought about the war, along with publishing information about the war as a whole. In 1939, a poll was taken of Jewell students pertaining to what the United States should do and to what extent the United States should be involved. In issue 3 of the William Jewell Student, a poll was published with the following statistics. At this time, in the war, 82% of the students believed that the United States should only get involved in the war with active military involvement if the United States was directly attacked. Along with this, 68% of the student body supported elimination, the restriction of selling ammunition and supplies to the Allied forces. This policy the United States had enacted would later be called cash and carry. We would supply the Allies, but they had to pay for it immediately, and they had to come to the United States and transport it themselves. Concluding this poll, 18% of the student body said the United States should enter the war in the event that the Allies were threatened with defeat. As these polls state, the campus was only in partial agreement on what the United States should do.
Most all of them were, because you see they were around 17, 18, 19 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, Jewell had a program at just about the same time.
In the Naval Flight Program?
That's right, yeah. And most colleges had college programs of some kind to offer refresher courses, if it was math or chemistry, physics, or whatever the field of interest was that the guy was enlisting for. They would send you to training school.
To elaborate and better explain how Jewell's role as a Baptist institution was the role of the conscientious objector to the war. This topic was quite controversial at Jewell. Many ministerial students stated that they would not partake in the conflict, it would not enter the war if drafted, because of their strong Christian-centered views and beliefs. While the role of conscientious objection at the start of 1940 was small in number, with only 2 people publicly stating their beliefs on the war, in the second issue, William Jewell Student, it quickly increased. By the 20th issue of that same year, the number of conscientious objectors had grown to 28. This led to obvious conflicts of ideals, with one side holding down the ideas of objecting the war on the grounds of Christian beliefs, being opposed by those who took the stance with the ideals of joining the war effort because of a patriotic duty. To continue with the debate of conscientious objection and American duty, an interesting event took place on the campus during the 1940 school year. The campus had been covered in pacifist handbills, resulting in a tremendous uproar from the pro-war and pro-support students on campus. The students who found themselves on the side opposing the objection to the war called for the culprit of the handbills to be caught, tarred, and feathered for their action. Although the side of conscientious objection was one of merit, faith, and courage to stand on, it was greatly outnumbered by those who supported the involvement of the United States in the war.
There was, and they were known as conscientious objectors.
Yes, sir.
But those were boys, maybe who used being a ministerial student. Some of the guys that weren't interested in studying ministry used to joke about these guys that were signing up to be ministers. It was their way of dodging, some of their ways of dodging an enlistment, see what I mean, or a draft selection. But they weren't prominent on campus. You didn't hear that unless you were talking privately in
So
your
they
home.
weren't openly against
That's right, because there was too much pressure involved if you would stand on a street corner talking about something like that. Because the endeavor was to be solid and to be firm, to be aggressive in what we were wanting to do, defeat Germany. Bartering. The Germans believed in bartering. The Americans never did. The Americans always considered it as black market.
Yeah.
So anyway, during the occupancy of the German troops or American troops, I think the people got along probably better under the Germans because they could barter and get what they didn't have or couldn't buy, or by trading, see.
One of the more interesting and notable students that entered Jewel during the time before the United States entered World War II was a young man named Joseph Katz. Katz was just like any other student at Jewel, except for the fact that he was a German Jew. Katz had escaped Germany through Switzerland after the capture, imprisonment, and release of his family by the Third Reich. While at Jewel, Katz gave several presentations on life in Germany under Adolf Hitler, the war, and the nature of Nazi Germany. According to one of Katz's presentations at Jewel, where he described his own interpretations of Hitler and the Third Reich, the German people at this time viewed Hitler as more of a deity than a leader. Many saw him as the savior of a once devastated Germany. Because of this view of Hitler, he could do no wrong, just like any other deity-like figure cannot do any wrong. Because of this, Katz elaborated that the German people followed and supported Adolf Hitler regardless of his actions. Katz was only at Jewel until 1941, when he graduated with a degree in Greek and philosophy. Although Katz was only at Jewel for a short time, his input was tremendous in properly showing and explaining what life was like in a Nazi-occupied Germany. The aim was to graduate students faster in order for them to enter the U.S. workforce or military faster. In addition to the year-round schooling, Jewel was gearing up for war. New physical fitness programs were implemented. In addition to courses on campus, a temporary program that shipped students to Nebraska for a few months for them to work in an ammunition plant, making war materials, was offered to students. Jewel participated in war stamp drives, bond sales drives, and a scrap collecting contest was held. The work was being put in on Jewel's campus to help the war effort in any way that they could. One of the largest contributing factors that Jewel participated in, and in the end changed the landscape image and ideals of Jewel for the foreseeable future, was the CAA, Civil Aeronautics Administration, Naval Flight School program that was awarded to Jewel. The Naval Flight School engulfed the campus of William Jewell in the year during World War II. The campus landscape was changed and Jewel became a gear in the war machine. The presence of an increased number of people on campus affected many aspects of life at Jewel. Buildings were taken over to house the extra men on campus, including the fraternity houses, the president's house, and some of the dormitories. This school's purpose was to teach the basics of flight, ground instruction, and mechanical knowledge to young cadets. The pilots that attended William Jewell received 3 months of academic work. The cadets then moved on to the elementary flight and ground instruction schools for 2 months. The Navy school located at Jewell was a war training service school where civilians served as teachers for the pilots.
In the fall of '42, they were back on what they call a term basis. It's not like it is today, but semesters. Every other person on the campus was what's the word I want to use for encouraging someone to join
Like a recruiter?
the recruiters. That's what it was. You had recruiters for every branch of
Beginning in 1943, 2 years after the United States declared war on Germany and Japan, Jewell was once more host for another Navy flight program. The second program differed greatly from the one that had been on Jewell's campus earlier. The program had over 600 individuals at a time. In order to house all the soon-to-be pilots, the students of Jewell were shipped off campus to devote the entire Ely building to the naval cadets. The Brown Hall Gymnasium and all of Marston Hall, including the Office of Current Jewell History and Life Professor, Dr. Christopher Wilkins, were taken over to be used by the Navy. At this point, this was the height of involvement by Jewell in the Great World War. The entire campus had been taken over to educate and train the pilots who would defend democracy and freedom all across Germany. These were the men and women that the citizens of the United States were instilling with the sacred duty of protecting the homeland abroad. This was Jewell standing to help in any way that they could to support the efforts of the United States.
the Air Corps to me was the only thing that was really worthwhile, worth getting involved in. To me, it was exciting. When I was a boy, I lived on a 5 acres of land in north part of town. There was a pretty good sized woods in back of the house that we lived on in. And but back in those days, when if you were working in the yard or playing or doing anything, and an airplane came over, you stopped what you were doing to look up and see what was happening, or what was, wonder where he was going, and just a lot of different things. Like we were billet in our class. I'm just going to take one class at a time. Our class, 1 week we flew in the mornings and went to ground school in the afternoon. The next week it would be reversed. And there were 3 cadets per room, like a motel, and your bath and shower and stool was in the bathroom, where it was in the center between these two. So you know, it was only at nighttime is when you had 6 people in the area because of the way that. Well, anyway, I was up with an instructor one day, gone to a small grass field, and we were going to shoot landings on my hour of being up with him. And he sat in the front cockpit. We were in biplane.
The Naval Flight School brought an important economic boost to William Jewell and Liberty, along with its boost of naval cadets. Jewell was awarded $37,000 from the Navy annually for its role in the flight school program. The flight school also brought a tremendous economic boom for the town of Liberty. A new dance club and a new Coke bar were built for the students, teachers, and ordinary Liberty citizens to enjoy. The school that initially started with 18 total teachers had made its way all the way up to 46 instructors. This school was now a full-blown operation that took over the William Jewell campus. Everything in a normal day for the average Jewell student was changed. Cadets were marching the quad, planes were being worked on in the middle of the Ely Triangle, and a 100% committed school was born with one goal: to defeat the Japanese and the Germans. This school was reborn from a small Baptist liberal arts college to a full-blown military institution with patriotic duty flowing through its veins.
I started flight training in September, then just like about going back to school in a way, starting in September. This is the kind of sideline, but I was fortunate enough to be the first to solo out of my class. Each class had, I think it's either 33 or 35 cadets. We could hear him talking, but we couldn't talk back to the instructor. Do you understand what I mean? But that's no electronics at that time. There's just open air stuff. And when he wanted your attention, he'd take the stick and he'd hit it like this, and it would rattle and hit your knees. So when that happened, you better start paying attention, because he was wanting to tell you something. I had been shooting landings with him, and I was having a terrible day, absolutely terrible. Like when women complain about the wind blowing their hair. This was bad. I was really kind of halfway scared silly that he was going to wash me out right there and then. I mean, it's just, they told me, he says, pull this SOB over to the side and let me out. And right then and there, I figured, boy, I had it. He got it, took his chute out of the seat, cockpit area that he was in, and started to walk away, and then he turned around and he came back over to the right side of the plane, and he looked at me and he says, do you, and he just as sarcastic as it could be, ugly, mean. He says, do you think that you could possibly take this aircraft off and land it 3 times so you could qualify to solo? And I didn't know, but I knew enough to know that I said, I just looked at him eye to eye and I said, absolutely, I can do it. And I didn't know whether I could do it or not. But anyway, I went out to take off, and you pull up a 45-degree angle to the runway, and you always took off into the wind, and you always searched the skies to be sure you weren't taking off when somebody was coming in to land. Because the landing aircraft always had right-of-way. Well, anyway, you pull up on the 45-degree angle to the runway you were going to take off on, and you'd run your engine up, full throttle, and then check your mags. It's like a spark plug, in other words. So each engine had sort of like 2 spark plugs, and you're checking on both, check both spark plugs. So if one set failed, you had something to fall back on. Well, anyway, I cleared all that, got ready to take off. And no communication now, see, between the guys that stand on the perimeter and me and this airplane. And I you towed the brakes by tapping the toe, the top part of the brake. So you're towing the brakes, and you've got your stick back, and you're giving it full throttle, and it's just sitting there shaking. It's not moving. You couldn't figure out why it wasn't moving. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And to make a long story short, what had happened, the tail wheel was a swivel tail wheel. And when I had taxied up and set it on a 45-degree angle with the runway, the tail wheel had swung around and dropped into a gopher hole. So anyway, it was successful. I had 3 good landings and 3 good takeoffs and soloed. From that time on, you'd be assigned an hour to go out in quadrants around the field, and you worked out for whatever they were instructing you to work in. Slow rolls, snap rolls, spins, everything that we were being taught to do.
With the war coming to an end, Jewell had to reverse its ongoing process to militarize the students. The goal was to turn the campus back to the initial pre-war norms. In the 6th week of 1945, the construction of a new administrative building, Green Hall, began in order to cope with the amount of returning soldiers that would be attending Jewell. The Navy School at Jewell would end up departing from the campus in December 1945. Because of this, the 1945 football season was canceled due to a lack of players. Old faces returned as the military disappeared, and soldiers returned home from active duty. At the conclusion of the 1945 through 1946 school year, Harry Truman arrived on campus for the Jewell graduation and was awarded an honorary degree.
The GI Bill, of course, that's most of these colleges that were struggling say in the mid-40s, mid to late 40s, financially struggling. This GI Bill opened the door and paved the way for them to open their campuses, to enlarge their campuses, their curriculum. It was a godsend, really, to a lot of small colleges, and I think that Jewell probably was fortunate themselves at that.
In the fall of 1946, Jewell broke its record with 726 students enrolled, 414 of which were
back to school. I was a Sigma Nu and stayed in the house. I don't know whether do you know where the Sigma Nu house is on Water Street? Do you happen to know?
I do, yeah.
Oh yeah, most of them. In fact, our whole house was filled with basically returnees.
Jewell was transformed greatly due to the amount of involvement the institution received during the war. Prior to the war, Jewell was a typical Baptist school with students who had the same typical cares and troubles students have today. This all changed after World War II as we saw soldiers walking the quad in tight formation. These patriotic beliefs that came with the war sometimes clashed with strong Christian beliefs and values. Multiple students went to serve in the war, and various faculty members who served had great influence over students' education and lives later on. Even though Jewell is a small school in the heart of the Midwest, the students and community were greatly affected by the war that ensued. This campus came together to prepare a solid and united home for the men and women that would go overseas to fight for the freedom we have today. Jewel was a small in number, but excelled in the heart, generosity, love, and community strength that is needed to not only survive the war, but also the hardships that come with sending young men and women to fight, where their return is not a certainty. This school showed what it means to be United Americans. The community stepped up and did the duty that their country desperately needed of them. William Jewell College, its students, and its faculty made the United States proud and gave all the members of this group a little more pride and love for the institution we are lucky enough to be a part of.
Torpedo boat, from the way he described it to me. They were fast, inboard engines, and had torpedoes on board and mines, and they were dodge in and out of traffic and all of this stuff, quick and easy. So he was telling me, he says, you know, he says, man, did they sound great. You go down to the harbor in the morning and you could hear them. They already started the engines that were diesel engines, and you could hear them boom, 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 boom. He says, man, that really turned me on. But anyway, there was a lot of men on campus. So I left school at the end of December, or in December, when I went home because of the term system. There wasn't any point in signing up for another term of school because you enlisted and you were just waiting to get your call. That's what most of this activity here was. So.
But you volunteered to be in the war, right?
Right. I had no interest in joining the Coast Guard, and I couldn't see it. I was assigned to fly C-47s, which no one in the outfit wanted to fly a C-47, which was a two-engine transport plane. And it was about as anti-war in a way when you were thinking about being in the combat zone or combat situation. Because most of the guys wanted to fly B-25s. That I was there actually during the time of the Battle of the Bulge. It was at the very tail end of the events, but I was in the theater at that time. We were more like a transport of different things. We flew into situations where we would pick up wounded soldiers and fly them back to Paris, where they were flown from Paris back into England for special treatment and surgical procedures.
Mm-hmm.
We flew displaced personnel that had been held as slave labor in Germany back to their relative homes. And that was those were sad situations to see, because they were emaciated, they hadn't eaten properly, when they were lined up to get on board our planes, it was like cattle in the field to go to the restroom, to do anything. Bad things. Anyway, we moved fighter groups that were closer to Berlin, moving up, always moving toward Berlin to try to get there. And we didn't beat the Russians there. The Russians beat us to Berlin.